Greetings, dear reader. I am Erik Eldritch, and today we'll be reading my book, Don't Worry, I Won't Be Long, The Tale of Greypelt and the Thieves of Reggio. Drudo had not slept much, if at all. It was hard to tell the difference between dreams and his runaway thoughts. The hope for Ferrante's return slowly faded away, and the pain of losing his friend began to settle in its place. He would drift off only to be jolted awake by distorted imagination, and then lie there in his bed, grappling with his agonizing mind. It was during one of these wakeful moments that the giant heard the sound of his thieves muttering to themselves outside his door. He thought at first that they had simply picked an annoying place to gossip with each other, but eventually overheard them debating whether to awaken their master, and which of them should be responsible for the dangerous deed. Drudo decided to save them the trouble. He flung open the door of his quarters and caught them quite by surprise. "What is it?" the mountainous man demanded. "Do you have news of Ferrante's fate?" No, Master Drudo," the messenger stuttered. "It's not to do with Ferrante, and we're afraid it's not good news either." "Tell me," Drudo ordered. Anger was rising in his voice, promising that they would be in more trouble for dragging this out any further than they would be for delivering this new disaster. "It may be nothing," the minion whimpered. "We hope it is so, but given the circumstances—" "Another has gone missing, my lord," the other explained. "Grazia is nowhere to be found. It's not unlike her to disappear on a whim, but surely now is not the time for it." "No, you were right to bring this to my attention," Drudo assured them. He had been prepared to get angry, but hopefully this was nothing. In the best case, Grazia could be late in returning because she had found a lead worth investigating. "Did she say where she was going? Have you looked there?" "That only makes it worse, boss," the thief continued. "She said she was going to snoop around the bounty office for any sign that the men had been brought in. We wanted to go looking after her, but we don't dare go near that place." Now the anger took over. His minion saw the giant's face flush red and imagined smoke and flame billowing from his ears and nostrils. If those damned city guards or their bounty hunters had made a move against him in his moment of weakness, there'd be hell to pay. If Grazia was in danger, he was going to go to her rescue. No more waiting, no more worrying. It was time to take action himself. And a small part of the giant man held out hope that maybe it wouldn't just be Grazia he was rescuing, but Ferrante and a few survivors of the expedition, too. If they hadn't returned to the hideout, the bounty office was one of the few places they might be where his network of thieves and spies wouldn't have found them. "We'll all go," the giant commanded. "Gather all the swords and weapons we have left and wake up Therion and Hippolyta and anyone else who can handle a fight. Torches and tinder, too. We'll march down to the bounty office in force and ransack the place." The messengers were far more frightened of their wild-eyed boss than they were of the bounty office. They scrambled away to fulfill his orders and rally the thieves. The guild was going to war. Grazia knew the city of Reggio like the back of her hand, and assumed she'd be able to sense where the demon dog was taking her, even though she couldn't see. It proved to be more difficult than she hoped. In the total silence of night, there were no familiar sounds or voices to act as landmarks. The noises of the moving cart sounded like a heavy storm by comparison. The stealthy Saurian wagon puller was particularly disturbing to the keen-eared Panati. She was used to horses or oxen who clop their hooves against the street and utter a plethora of various animal sounds. The crocodilian, by contrast, was impossibly quiet. At times, it sounded to the spy master like the cart was moving on its own, and only rarely would the scraping of claws on cobblestones remind her of its presence. At last, the faint sounds of hustle and bustle were like a beacon to the Panati's ears. It was too early for the markets to be opening, but there was another possibility. After a short wait, the scent of the sea confirmed her suspicions. She was at the docks. As the wagon drew nearer, the voices became clear enough that she could identify fishermen bringing in their boats and fishmongers collecting the catch of the day. The spy master could sense that the cynocephalus was actively avoiding any people. Even in the busy docks of Reggio, she and her beast would stick out like a sore thumb, and the exotic foreigner probably wanted to avoid unnecessary attention for reasons aside from her hidden captive. Eventually the cart stopped, and Grazia heard her gracious host exchange words with some sort of guard, intermediated by her new translator. Apparently, the cynocephalus produced some visual form of identification that was immune to the Panadi's keen hearing, and the guard accepted and allowed the stranger to enter. The chief of information deduced that they were in some sort of merchant warehouse. The building itself was guarded, and there were various private vaults for businessmen to lock up their wares between sales. Greypelt had been given access to this place by her client, Vasiclo, in case she needed it. He was a noble with business interests across the Mediterranean and owned a portion of this warehouse for his dealings in Calabria. The cynocephalus had hoped to spend her free time outside the human city, but given the deadline of her mission, she could no longer risk staying so far away. The ship bound for Theodosia would be arriving any day now, and she needed to make sure Andronikos was on it. Greypelt took her time to settle in before attending to her guest's gag and blindfold. When Grazia was finally reawakened to the world, she found that she was indeed in one of these warehouse vaults. Bruno had followed along like a stray dog, not knowing where else to go. The reptilian titan was curled up in a corner of the room and taking a nap after its eventful night. The cynocephalus had laid a blanket upon the floor to sit on, as though she were out for a picnic. The savage traveler had put away her long black cloak and most of her trinket-bearing belts and pouches. Now only a few rags of cloth covered her most indecent areas. She would have preferred the comfort of fully stripping, but restrained herself in the presence of these prudish city-dwellers. To her guests, though, even this seemed quite scandalous. Brenna watched in stunned silence, fearing the possibility of a fatal misunderstanding. Grazia's colored past had left her no stranger to bare bodies, be they human or Panadi, male or female, handsome or homely. She had learned to dispassionately appreciate fine specimens of either gender without feeling jealous or desirous. But this exotic Amazon was striking the spy master in a strange way. The wolf-woman was such a mix of features, a feminine form covered in masculine musculature, a friendly canine face, and yet an air of savage brutality. And everything that Grazia knew about the surreal stranger so far indicated that she was a woman of great skill, even in the realm of covert activities which the spymaster had great appreciation for. After all, the dog-headed Amazon had almost succeeded in spiriting Andronikos out of Reggio, with the only witness thinking she had spawned from hell, and she was the first person in decades to lay a hand on Reggio's chief of information, let alone fully abduct her. If fate had not dealt them the roles of enemies, Grazia could imagine that they might be close companions. As the spymaster struggled to subdue her confusing thoughts, her eyes wandered to several piles of clothing and weapons that the cynocephalus had arranged before her. The Panadi puzzled over these items for a second, and quickly deduced that they were the wrong size and style for the foreign fighter. In fact, they were strangely familiar. The realization struck Grazia like a slap to the face, and she gasped as she recognized what she was looking at. It was the loot gathered from the swordsman sent to rescue Andronikos, and the amount of it indicated what a disaster the expedition had been. "Ah, good. I'm glad to see the spymaster is as intelligent as her reputation suggests," Greypelt congratulated her captive. "It's best that you fully understand who you are dealing with. It would have been better to show you the heads I collected, but we've already turned them in for ducats. I hope that their belongings will get my point across." "I take it they did not hand them over willingly," Grazia ventured sourly. "On the contrary," Greypelt replied. "They became quite agreeable once I relieved them of their lives. You thieves strike me as quite the generous bunch. I'm sure you'd all keep me well stocked with loot and bounty payments, but that's not what I've come to Reggio for." The Grey Devil reached for her prisoner's chin and tilted her face towards her own. "Andronikos Anatoli," she spoke, and read the reaction in Grazia's eyes. "Tell me what you know." Spymaster realized exactly what her canine captor was doing. She had seen her psychically dissect Bruno in the street already. Claiming ignorance would be a deadly mistake. "Well, you've had him in your clutches once," the Panadi answered. "He is new to the guild, but talented. A rising star that has yet to find his place in the sky." She deliberately left out the carnelian swan, as it still wasn't clear if the cynocephalus knew or even cared about it. Greypelt scanned her prisoner's face closely. The fact of the matter was that Panadi were naturally better at guarding their emotions than humans, and the spy master was probably one of the best in all Italia. This was more a show for the human's benefit than a useful endeavor, and hopefully the Panati would be scared into believing it as well. "What you want with Andronikos is a mystery to us," Grazia added. Even in captivity, the chief of information was eager to fill the gaps in her understanding. "I suppose it should only advance my cause to tell you," the Cynocephalus decided. "Andronikos hails from Theodosia. He committed quite the heist against a local noble named Vasiclo, but was found out. The little thief has been a wanted man for some time. It's become quite the scandal for Vasiclo. Being unable to avenge his honor has driven him to the brink of madness. When a Genovese merchant heard a rumor of the front here in Reggio, Vasiclo put a bounty contract out on him. That's all I'm after. I don't care about your little guild or the little baubles you plunder. All I want is my mark. But if you people stand against me, I will break you to pieces." Now it was Grazia scanning Greypelt's face for sincerity. If the canine features revealed any secrets, they were doing so on a wavelength that the Panati spy was not trained to decipher. The story seemed logical enough. A noble chasing a thief halfway across the world was a little crazy, but nobles were known to get crazier. If the story were made up, surely Messina or Napoli or even Byzantium would have been more believable than distant Theodosia, beyond the Bosphorus. The even-toned, matter-of-fact voice of the Cynocephalus betrayed no hints of instability in tempo or pitch that might have indicated falsification, and the ropes and the lack of sleep and the soft fur and bulging muscles were all too distracting. "In any case," the canine continued, "it's hardly any contest between the two of you. I'm sure your Drudo would rather have his special little spy than some Theodosian thief that has yet to prove himself. A trade would be more than fair." A grim look came over the spy master that pierced through her Panati mask. Greypelt snarled and looked over at her human for confirmation. Bruno had also turned gray at the suggestion. "What is it?" the Amazon demanded. Bruno glanced back and forth between the two women and finally decided to speak. "I doubt that Drudo wants to trade. You've harmed his guild, so he'll want to harm you back. And given the degree of the injury, I'm sure he wants you dead." "It is so," Grazia chimed in. "The man's in a fury. Usually I'd be happy to send a bounty hunter like you to meet your death at his hands, but I shudder to think what bloodshed the two of you will wrought." Greypelt scoffed. "If he wants to kill me, I'll give him the chance. A few wounds might soften his spirit. Or better yet, a trip to the grave might put the matter into the hands of whoever is next in line." The Grey Devil chuckled fiendishly at her own thoughts. "Although it strikes me that his second in command has already been removed, and I assume I hold the third in my clutches. Perhaps it won't take long for you, my dear human, to be the one in control." "Surely I'd be at the back of the line by now," Bruno speculated. "If it comes to that, it comes to that," the she-wolf finished grimly. With the conversation concluded, the barbarian bounty hunter scooped up her rope-bound prisoner, slung her over her shoulder, and hauled her across the room. But to both of the Calabrians' surprise, she did not make for the exit, but for the side of her slumbering reptile. "All that can wait until later," the unfathomable foreigner explained. "Let the giant feel the loss of his spy master first. In the meantime, all of us are due some sleep." Greypelt sat with her back against her beast and plopped her Panati prisoner down beside her. As the Cynocephalus wrapped a muscly arm around Grazia's shoulder, Latifa lethargically wrapped her serpentine tail around her master and guest. The Ninky Nunka's flexible neck craned around to brush her muzzle against her master's side. If Grazia was feeling confused about her feelings for the Cynocephalus, she suddenly found herself with ample opportunity to sort them out. "And don't get any ideas, my hairless ape," Greypelt addressed Bruno. "This side of the room is for ladies only." The sleepy serpent echoed her master's sentiment with a half-hearted hiss that, nonetheless, landed with full effect upon the human. "Wouldn't dream of it," Bruno answered sincerely. He rolled his cape up as a pillow, as he had done before, and wondered what he would be dreaming about this time. Peasants peered down the street at the spectacle, then slammed their windows shut and dived into doorways as the strange procession drew close. Few of them had ever laid eyes on the Gigaskin and his centaurs in person, but seeing them lead their mob of thieves down the streets of Reggio in broad daylight, they knew exactly who they were and what this gathering meant. Trouble. Drudo led his thieves from the front, his huge axe slung over his shoulder. It was a wood-chopping axe, double-bitted and never intended for violence, but the descendant of Gigantes felt that nimbler combat weapons didn't stand up to his heavy-handed style. His centaurs followed at his flanks, their roncones held in a similar manner. The wild hybrids had all the fury and none of the discipline that the typical military halberdier would display, happily jeering and scoffing at the crowd that darted out of their path. Behind them was their procession of criminals. They wore masks or rags upon their faces to hide their identities so that no one would recognize them when they returned to their work as thieves and spies. The loss of self seemed to embolden them too, with some of the normally quiet guild members taunting the peasants that vanished as they approached. Most of them carried daggers and hatchets. Some had taken up the swords that the guild had provided for the occasion, and a few had been selected to carry the torches and tinder that they would use to conclude their business. News of the mob preceded them as they marched. When they finally reached the bounty office, a few of the town guards stood ready for them with their brandy stocks and man-catchers. The lawmen had scrambled into formation, hoping for a chance to capture Reggio's most wanted criminal, but blanched when they laid eyes on the furious giant and his band of scallywags. Their leader saw his men wavering and tried to rally them. "Look here, lads. After the beating they received last night, Drudo and his guild have come to turn themselves in and escape their comrades' fate." The criminal Colossus was close enough to overhear the remark, and it stoked the fires of rage within him to a blazing conflagration. Drudo bellowed at the top of his lungs, a loud and low primordial blast that only he and his inhuman kin were capable of. He took leave of his senses and charged into the line of guards, with his battle-loving centaurs and loyal minions hot on his heels. Half of the lawmen found the courage to face the charge, while the others cowered at the battle before them. The swift centaurs met the enemy first and used their hooked weapons to wrench away their enemies' polearms. Drudo's mighty axe cut through weapon shafts and human skulls alike, as he joined the fray with great agility that seemed impossible for his bulk. The thieves with daggers and hatchets hurled their weapons from beyond the reach of the guildsmen's polearms and then melted back into the battle line. Those with swords leapt into the fray only to finish off any wounded or distracted foes. The guards who had balked at battle received no quarter for their cowardice. Drudo hewed them asunder as they stood dumbfounded at the carnage. The centaurs and fleet-footed bandits ran after any lawmen who tried to flee and cut them down in their tracks. The battle was over quickly. The thieves incurred a few flesh wounds, but no losses, while the hated guardsmen lay slain, staining the cobblestones red. The guildsmen hooted and clapped each other's backs for a job well done, but their master quickly reminded them that their work had only just begun. With a bestial grunt, Drudo lifted his axe and chopped into the door of the bounty office, reducing it to splintered planks in a few strokes. A few thieves watched the windows and circled the building to prevent anyone from escaping with desirable valuables, but most of the throng barged through the broken entryway on their leader's heels as soon as the door went down. The bandits bellowed their battle cries again, but the gruesome sight inside stopped their master in his tracks. The chain of heads delivered by the cynocephalus was still intact upon the main desk. The guards had been concocting some plan to display the gruesome trophy to the public, to strike fear into the hearts of evildoers and assure the peasantry that law and order had the upper hand. Drudo stopped in his tracks and stared. The centaurs and the armed bandits occupied themselves with cutting down and capturing the last few employees of the office who had sheltered inside during the fight. Marino shouted out the order to find Grazia on his boss's behalf, as the thieves began to ransack the place for loot. A few squeamish thieves had to stop alongside their master, but they did not share the same depth of emotion. Those heads and the lives they represented had all been Drudo's responsibility. He had tried to send them into victory with the best possible chance of success, and instead he had sent them to their deaths. He knew every one of his thieves by name and face, and quickly recognized that the entire expedition was accounted for. Many of the heads still showed evidence of the brutal wounds that had finished them off. And at last, there was his dear friend, Ferrante. By now any hint of his end by asphyxiation had fallen away, and only a calm visage remained on the dead man's face. Judo half expected his cool-headed deputy to open his eyes and make some quip about being separated from his body, but his monolithic silence in the midst of the bedlam wrought by his men upon the bounty office cut into Drudo like a knife. The thieves of the guild had expected such a reaction from their leader, and cast no judgment upon him for abandoning the fray. If anything, they were relieved that Mount Drudo had frozen over instead of erupting, and no thief would complain about the chance to raid the bounty office completely unchecked. Weapons and armor of the guard fell into the guild's arsenal, and badges and uniforms into their collection of disguises. The valuables confiscated from criminals by the lawmen were now in the hands of the guild. The vaults of coins that they used to pay bounties were forced open and distributed among the thieves. The only treasure that the thieves did not find was their primary goal, Grazia. Marino wielded his newfound authority as dragon survivor to direct the thieves. They all knew that their time was limited. As soon as word of the attack got out to the far corners of the vast city, reinforcements would be on their way. As the horde began to pull out, Therion rested a hand on his boss's shoulder. "We need to go. Do you plan to join us?" Drudo snapped out of his bereavement. "Did we find her?" "No, and not for lack of searching," the centaur explained. "She isn't here and never was." "All right. Bring the torches and burn this place to the ground." "What about them?" Therion asked, referring to the string of severed heads. "They can't have a proper burial in their state," Drudo admitted. "Let them be cremated here." Why the guildmaster put up with Therion's disrespectful attitude was a great mystery to most of the guild. Drudo himself often wondered why he allowed it, but right now, the mournful mountain needed someone who was not afraid of him to remind him of his own duties to the guild, to remind him that his thieves would only afford him these courtesies if he delivered them gold and glory in the end. The giant made a good show for his men. In reality, it took every ounce of his willpower to pull himself away from his beheaded friend and not join him on the fiery road to paradise. Life without Ferrante would be no life at all, nothing but a tedious wait for his own thread of fate to finally run out. So much damned waiting. The one thing that kept Drudo tethered to this world was the knowledge that his comrade's killer was still on the loose. His thieves still needed him, and Grazia especially, wherever she was. The guildmaster would at least finish his last piece of business in this life before letting it end. When Drudo saw that his men were clear of the bounty office, he ordered the torchbearers to light it up. Together they watched the place burn, with a combination of pyromaniacal glee and exultant celebration over dealing such a blow to their hated enemies, the town guard. The thieves may have been dealt a savage defeat by that otherworldly she-wolf, but they were still capable of dealing a mighty blow like this to their more mundane rivals. Ultimately, the thieves knew that their eternal adversary, the law, could not be defeated so easily. There were more town guards stationed all over the city, and it would only be a matter of time before they or some fame-chasing nobles and their private armies came looking for retaliation. At their master's command, they scattered, each returning to their hideout or their own safe houses, each by separate routes, each with sacks and bindles full of loot slung over their shoulders. The thieves who had covered their faces now dropped their disguises and melted into the crowds of Reggio. The giant and his centaurs were harder to hide, but they knew the city well and were halfway across town on secret routes before any guardsman knew to be on the lookout for them. Thank you for joining me, dear reader. If you'd like to help me out, you can press the like button. Let me know what's on your mind in the comments. And you can buy my books on Amazon. Link in the description. And with any luck, we'll all meet again.